I spent my entire adult life building up the family ranch, 10 years of sunrise feedings, broken fences, and late-night foalings. I thought I was working towards something we all believed in. But then my parents sold my $6 million share to pay for my sister's luxury wedding. And when I asked why, they told me I was being selfish. I lost everything: my land, my horses, my family. But that day, I didn't just lose. I began planning something they'd never see coming. My name is Rachel Donnelly, and if there's one thing I always believed in, it was legacy. I grew up in the heart of Texas on a sprawling 200-acre ranch that had been in my family for 4 generations. Long before I learned how to read, I could saddle a horse. While other kids were playing video games, I was mucking out stalls, bottle-feeding calves, and patching barbed wire fences. My parents used to say I had ranch blood in me, like it was part of my DNA. And maybe it was. From the moment I could stand, I knew this land was home. Not just a place to live, but a part of who I was. Every dusty sunrise, every scraped knee, every hard-earned lesson from a sick foal or a sudden storm, it was all stitched into me. I wasn't the wild child. That was my younger sister, Kylie. Where I was all boots and vet books, she was sequins and selfies. She had no interest in cattle or riding or fixing irrigation lines. She hated the smell of the stables, called the horses creepy, and refused to wear anything that might get dirt on it. We couldn't have been more different, but I loved her. I really did. Growing up, I believed we'd both get a piece of the ranch one day. Even if Kylie didn't want to work it, I figured she'd find her own way, maybe rent out her portion, or build a wedding venue, like she always joked. Me, I stayed. After college, I became a licensed veterinarian and came straight back to the ranch. I turned the back pasture into a rehabilitation space for injured horses. I poured my savings into the barn, upgrades, bought medical equipment, and started building a reputation as one of the top equine specialists in the county. I didn't do it for money. I did it because I loved it, because it was my home, and because I truly believed I was helping preserve something sacred. My parents always said they were proud of me. Every Christmas dinner, every birthday toast, Dad would raise his glass and say, "This one, she's the heart of the Donnelly Ranch," and I believed him. Looking back now, I wish I'd paid more attention to the quiet moments, the way Kylie rolled her eyes when I talked about pasture rotation, the way Mom always smiled politely but changed the subject when I mentioned expanding the rescue program, the way Dad hesitated when I asked about putting my name on the deed. But I didn't question it. I was too busy working, too focused on building a future I thought we all wanted. Kylie, meanwhile, was chasing a different dream. She moved to Dallas, started a lifestyle blog, dated oil heirs and minor celebrities. Then one day, she came home with a ring the size of a quail egg and a fiancé who made more in a week than most people made in a year. I didn't judge, not out loud at least. She was happy, and that's what mattered. At least, that's what I told myself. The trouble started 6 months before the wedding. It was subtle at first, Dad acting cagey about the ranch finances, Mom brushing off questions about the budget for Kylie's big day. I didn't think much of it until I noticed unfamiliar trucks coming in and out of the back property line. Surveyor gear, fencing supplies. And one afternoon, I saw a man I didn't recognize walking through my rehab pasture with a clipboard. I asked Dad what was going on. He said it was nothing to worry about. I wish I'd pushed harder. But when you trust someone, when it's your own flesh and blood, you want to believe them. So I kept working. Kept waking up before dawn, checking vitals on injured colts, training the rescue staff, and expanding the clinic. I had just put in a down payment on new portable ultrasound machines and finally hired a second vet tech, because in my mind, I was building something long-term, permanent, a legacy. A few weeks later, I was brushing down on one of our older horses when Kylie drove up in a brand new convertible, blasting music, and waving around an invitation mock-up for her wedding. I smiled, hugged her, listened to her rattle off floral arrangements and guest counts. But inside, something felt off, wrong. Still, I said nothing. I didn't know it yet. But the land I was standing on, the barn I had poured my soul into, no longer belonged to me. They'd already signed it away. The truth came out on a Tuesday. Oh, remember. Because it was the day I was supposed to meet with a supplier about ordering winter feed for the horses. I had just come in from the pasture, covered in hay and dust, when I saw Dad and Kylie talking by the main house. They stopped when they saw me too quickly. Their smiles were tight, like masks slipping out of place. Kylie was holding a stack of papers and some blueprints. I asked what they were. She laughed and said, "Oh, just some layout plans for the wedding. We're thinking of setting up a temporary pavilion near the lake." I blinked. The lake was on my side of the property, or at least I thought it was. Still, I didn't push. Not yet. That night, I went through the property documents I'd kept in my office. The legal stuff was always Dad's territory, but something told me I needed to look closer. And that's when I saw it. My name was gone. The section of land I'd cared for, lived on, built up with my own hands, was no longer listed under my name. Not even as co-owner. It had been sold, quietly, without my consent. I drove straight to the house. I wasn't even angry, at first just confused, hurt. "Dad," I said, holding up the papers, "what is this? Why is my name not on the title anymore?" He didn't even look surprised. "We had to make a decision, Rachel." "What kind of decision involves selling my land behind my back?" Kylie was sitting at the kitchen island sipping wine, like nothing was happening. Mom was quiet, eyes cast down, and that's when Dad said the words that would echo in my mind for months after. "You don't need that land. Kylie's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We wanted to give her something beautiful." I couldn't breathe. "You sold my share of the ranch to pay for a wedding." Kylie rolled her eyes. "It's not like you were making any real money off it." I looked at her stunned. "I've poured 10 years into that land. I built the clinic. I invested everything I had." Mom finally spoke. "Rachel, you're always so serious. Can't you just be happy for your sister? She deserves this." I felt like I was drowning in a sea of casual cruelty. "You sold my future," I whispered, "and didn't even tell me." "You're being dramatic," Dad snapped. "We gave you a place to live for free. We never charged you rent. And this is how you repay us, by acting entitled." "Entitled?" I choked out a laugh. "You stole from me." Kylie stood up and walked over, arms crossed. "You've always had a martyr complex, Rachel. Not everything is about you. This is my time, for once." I left that night without saying goodbye. I spent the next few days making calls, trying to understand how they'd legally removed me. Turned out, years ago, Dad had asked me to sign what he said were insurance updates. Buried in that stack was a transfer of rights clause. I had trusted him. I never thought I'd need a lawyer to deal with my own father. And now, it was all gone. The barn, the rehab program, the fields I'd planted, the horses I'd raised. I was erased. To make it worse, I wasn't even invited to the wedding. Kylie said it would ruin the mood if I showed up with a sour face. Mom texted some half-hearted message about keeping things peaceful. Dad didn't say anything at all. The day of the wedding, I stood at the edge of the public road just far enough to see the pavilion. Crystal chandeliers swung from white tent poles. Rows of imported roses lined the aisle. There were food trucks, photographers, even a live jazz quartet right there in the spot where I used to let the colts roam free. A waiter offered me a mini lobster roll. I wasn't even sure if he knew I wasn't on the guest list. I handed it back and walked away. That night, I sat in my truck for hours. No music, no phone, just silence. It wasn't just betrayal. It was loss. Grief for a family I thought I knew. For land I thought was mine. For a version of myself that believed loyalty would be enough. I looked at my hands, calloused, sunburnt, scarred from years of hard work. And I realized something. They didn't see value in me because I never asked them to. They saw sacrifice as weakness and love as currency. And suddenly, I wasn't sad anymore. I was ready. Not for revenge, not exactly, but for something better. Something that would remind them what I was capable of without ever lifting a finger against them. They had stolen my land. I was going to build something so powerful, so undeniable, that they'd wish they'd never touched it. The days after Kylie's wedding were strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow. I kept expecting someone to call, maybe to apologize, or at least to offer some explanation. But the silence was louder than any excuse could have been. It was like I'd been scrubbed out of the family, edited out of the picture entirely. I walked into the barn one last time before the new owners were set to arrive. It still smelled like cedar and horse feed. My tools were gone, packed into a trailer out back. I ran my fingers across the stall door, where my first rescue mare, Willow, had once leaned into my chest like she understood heartbreak. Now it was empty, like me. I had spent a decade building that place brick by brick, inch by inch. It wasn't just a barn. It was the sum of every night I'd stayed up bottle feeding sick foals. Every weekend I'd spent patching fences while my friends were at brunch. Every dollar I'd saved and reinvested when I could have traveled or bought nice clothes or even just taken a break. And they had sold it for a damn wedding cake that melted in the sun. I moved in temporarily with a friend who owned a feed store a few towns over. She gave me a spare bedroom above the shop. It was small and smelled like molasses and old hay, but it was quiet. It was safe. And for the first time in my life, I had to ask, who was I without that ranch? A few weeks later, I drove by the land out of habit. I told myself I just wanted to see if they'd cleared the barn, but part of me hoped they hadn't touched anything. Maybe they'd realize they'd made a mistake and call me, ask me to come back. What I saw instead made my stomach flip. The barn had been gutted. My hand-painted stall signs were in a dumpster. The oak tree where I used to hang Christmas lights every year was gone, cut down to open up the view, apparently. They'd turned my sanctuary into some sterile, Instagrammable vacation rental. Worse, they had renamed it Whisper Ridge. Whisper Ridge. I laughed out loud in my truck, an ugly, bitter laugh that sounded more like crying. That night, I got drunk for the first time in years. Not tipsy, not a glass of wine. I drank straight from a bottle of cheap bourbon, sitting on the floor of the feed room, crying into a feed sack like it could absorb the betrayal. I cried for the horses that had no place to go now, for the clients who called and asked, "Where are you moving the practice?" when I had no answer. For the girl, I used to be the one who thought hard work and loyalty were enough to guarantee love. One morning, about a month after the wedding, I got a call from a woman named Jenna. She worked for a local rescue org and had heard through the grapevine that I was taking a break. She asked if I could help evaluate a few abandoned horses on a foreclosure property an hour outside town. I didn't want to go, but something told me I needed to. The property was a mess. Overgrown fields, broken fences, skeletal animals with ribs like piano keys. But something stirred in me as I walked the land, something old and fierce and deeply familiar. Jenna must have seen it in my face. "You could take this over," she said, almost offhand. "We've got some grant money. It's not much, but you'd be surprised what you can do with a little fire in your gut." Fire. That's exactly what I had left. 2 weeks later, I used the last of my savings, plus a loan from the rescue network, to put a down payment on the land. It was nowhere near the size of my family's ranch, but it was mine. No strings, no betrayal baked into the soil, just raw earth and potential. But starting over wasn't glamorous. For the first few months, I lived in a trailer on the property. I showered with cold water, ate canned beans, and patched fences with secondhand supplies. My hands bled. My back ached. I lost weight I didn't have to lose. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't broken. I was building. Every nail I hammered felt like defiance. Every rescued horse that nuzzled into my shoulder was proof that I still had purpose. Meanwhile, Kylie's Instagram started shifting. At first, it was all smiling pictures from the honeymoon in Bora Bora. Then came the sponsored content skincare brand's teeth whitening kits. Then, slowly, the photos became less curated. Captions got defensive. Comments turned off. 6 months after the wedding, I got a call from my cousin Sarah. "You won't believe this," she said. "Kylie's husband filed for bankruptcy. His crypto investments tanked. They're selling the wedding rings." I didn't gloat, not out loud, but inside I felt something shift. That same week, the Austin Sentinel ran a feature on my new rescue sanctuary ranch, I called it. Not flashy, but honest. The article praised our work with neglected animals and highlighted how we'd already rehabbed a dozen horses in under 4 months. We started getting donations, volunteers, press. Then came the call I never saw coming. Mom. She didn't start with an apology. Of course not. She opened with small talk, asked if I was eating well if the winter had been rough. Then she mentioned Kylie's situation. "She's having a hard time," she said. "We all are, really. Your father and I had to take out a second mortgage to help cover some of her debts. Things are tight." I waited. Then came the pitch. "We were thinking, maybe you could come home. Help out. You always had a knack for fixing things." There it was, the twist of the knife. I took a long breath, then said, as calmly as I could, "Home. You mean the place you sold out from under me?" She went quiet. Then, in a voice small enough to almost sound sincere, she said, "We made a mistake, Rachel." I wanted to believe her. But you can't unburn a bridge by tossing rose petals in the ashes. I told her I'd think about it. Instead, I made a different call. The owner who bought my old land had recently listed it. It again turns out vacation ranching wasn't as lucrative as they'd hoped. With the support of my donors, a few strategic sponsors, and a small business grant, I made an offer. Cash, no contingencies. 2 weeks later, I walked through the gate of my former ranch not as a daughter, not as a victim, as its new owner. The barn was in rough shape, but I didn't care. I stood in the center of that dusty field wind in my hair, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. I wasn't going to live there again. That part of my life was over. But I had a new plan. The land would become a sanctuary, one for animals, and for the kind of people who needed healing. Veterans trauma survivors, abandoned teens. The kind of people who, like me, had been told they didn't matter until they proved they did. When Dad came by a few days later, uninvited, he didn't even recognize the place. The sanctuary sign was already up. Fresh paint, new fencing, volunteers setting up mobile vet units. He looked older, tired. "We heard you bought it," he said awkwardly. I nodded. "We were hoping," he trailed off, but I didn't need him to finish. I just handed him a brochure. "Welcome to Sanctuary Ranch, built by betrayal, grown by grace." He stared at it for a long time, then turned and left without a word. And I went back to work. Because healing isn't loud, it's steady. And karma shows up when you stop waiting for it and start becoming it. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't interested in yelling or lawsuits or making them beg. That wasn't the point anymore. The real power, the kind that lasts, wasn't in burning bridges. It was in building something they could never touch again, and watching them realize it. So I got strategic. First, I created a nonprofit foundation tied to Sanctuary Ranch. It focused on animal therapy for trauma survivors, especially young girls who had experienced family rejection or emotional abuse. I called it the Willow Project, named after my first rescue horse, the one they said wasn't worth saving. Funny how the discarded ones often grow into something unstoppable. Next, I contacted every old client from my veterinary days, those who had cried when the ranch was sold. I told them I was back operating a new clinic, more focused, more holistic. They returned in droves. The waiting list tripled in 3 months. I had to bring on 2 assistants. Then I went public. The Austin Sentinel did a follow-up article titled "From Cast-Off to Caretaker." How one woman turned family betrayal into a healing empire. The headline alone was enough to sting. But what really sent shockwaves? The full-page photo, me standing in front of the new barn with a teenage girl, brushing a rescue horse. Clean boots. Rolled sleeves. No bitterness on my face, just quiet, defiant peace. I knew Kylie saw it. She'd blocked me, but Sarah forwarded me the screenshot. Kylie had reposted the article with a bitter emoji caption, "Some people are addicted to playing the victim." That was fine. I didn't need her to applaud. But the next move, that was for my parents. I sent them an invitation. Not to a conversation, not to forgiveness, to a fundraising gala, held at the very ranch they once ripped away from me. The invite was hand-delivered, sealed with gold foil lettering, and their names in embossed script. Mr. and Mrs. Keller, you are cordially invited to celebrate the one-year anniversary of Sanctuary Ranch, a place built with love, not bloodlines. Join us for a night of healing, hope, and legacy. Formal attire required. Please RSVP. I didn't expect them to come, but they did. They arrived late, naturally. My mother in a beaded shawl, 2 seasons out of style, my father in a stiff gray suit that didn't hide the fact that stress had added 20 pounds and 10 years to his frame. I greeted them at the door, like they were strangers at a hotel. Polite, warm, distant. Rachel. Mom said, her voice small. This is beautiful. Thank you. I smiled. It's what I always wanted. You just didn't see it. We walked past the donor wall, a tall glass panel, etched with names of sponsors, volunteers, and partner organizations. Dead center, under gold script, was the quote, "She wasn't reborn. She rebuilt." And below that, founded by Rachel Keller, formerly disowned, permanently unstoppable. They paused. Dad cleared his throat. You didn't have to, I did. I interrupted gently. Because truth matters. And if your silence was loud enough to break me, then my truth should be loud enough to rebuild others. Then came the moment I had carefully orchestrated. I took the stage to give the keynote speech. The lights dimmed. A spotlight clicked on. I wore a sleek navy dress, not flashy, but powerful. The kind of dress that said, I own the room, not because I demand it, but because I earned it. I looked out over the audience, donors, media, former clients, and yes, my parents. Then I told my story. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. I spoke about how betrayal had once ripped the floor from under me, how I had nearly disappeared under the weight of being told I was too responsible, too serious, too much. How I had believed for too long that love had to be earned through sacrifice. And how eventually I realized that the deepest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's reclaiming your name. It's succeeding where they swore you'd fail. It's offering grace where they gave you gravel and never letting their limits become your blueprint. I didn't name them, but I didn't have to. The entire room could feel who I was talking about. The applause at the end was thunderous. But what happened after? That was karma's final note. My mother approached me slowly, eyes glistening. I didn't know you had that in you, she whispered. You never asked, I said quietly. Then I stepped away, because I didn't need validation anymore. They had made their choices. Now I was making mine. And while they stood there unsure of their place, I walked into the courtyard, surrounded by the people I had chosen, the purpose I had built, and the peace they could never steal again. Karma wasn't a thunderclap. It was a spotlight they had no role in, and I was finally the woman I had always been, unhidden, unbroken, unbought. It's been 3 years since I opened Sanctuary Ranch. 3 years since I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come and started building something that didn't need one. The land they sold behind my back. It now blooms with wildflowers and the gentle rhythm of rescued hooves. Horses once discarded like I was now run free, and every time I see a child's face light up as they touch a creature for the first time, timid, then brave, I know I have done more than survive. I've transformed. My sister Kylie divorced less than a year into her $1 million marriage. Turns out, love bought in bulk doesn't last. She reached out, once some vague message about wanting to reconnect, but I didn't reply. Not out of hate, just clarity. I had nothing left to give where there was never room for me to begin with. My parents. They visit sometimes. As donors, not family. They don't get the tour. They don't get the stories. They get the newsletter, just like everyone else. And once my mother stood in front of the sign at the gate and cried. The sign says, "Welcome to Sanctuary Ranch. Built by betrayal, grown by grace." It's not there to shame them. It's there to remind me and everyone who walks through these gates that even the deepest wounds can become the richest soil. That love doesn't always come from where you expect. Sometimes it comes from the life you choose to create out of ashes, out of silence, out of strength no one believed you had. I'm not the girl who begged to belong anymore. I am the woman who became the place where others finally do. And in the quiet dusk of Texas, under a sky too wide for regrets, that is more than enough.